I'd been working as a carpenter for 8 years before I went to work for a concrete company that gave me the opportunity to do enough of this work that I became confident. Because coming out of the ground is the intimidating part of construction. Starting with a set of plans and a site map, and then putting that building exactly where it needs to be so the guys that come in to frame the floor have a square, plumb and true foundation to work on is a little intimidating. You may remember that the first thing I did was establish the perimeter of the building with paint, and then we dug it up. So now I have to reestablish the perimeter of the building with string. So it gives us something that is exactly in the right spot, both in terms of line and in terms of grade, at the very beginning of our foundation work, so that everything that happens after that is going to be right. Holding your string has some tricks associated with it. Right off the bat, you have to decide, do I use a line stake, that is, just a stake that's driven in the ground with the string tied on it, or do I have to be able to adjust my string a few times before I get it right? In this case, I need to be able to adjust the string, so I'm going to use batter boards. Batter boards are lumber. Doesn't have to be new, doesn't have to be nice, that is set outside of building line long enough that whatever you discover about where your building is going to go, you can drive a nail to hold the string wherever it needs to be held, and you can adjust it. The location of the batter board itself is not critical. It just needs to be far enough outside of the building line that you can do all your work inside of the batter board without getting tangled up. Hopefully it's far enough outside of the building line that when you're done with the first step, which is setting up and pouring the footings, there's still enough of your batter board left and it's still secure enough that you can use it to recreate the next layout, which will be even more accurate than the location of the footing. That's sort of a key to this. As you come out of the ground, you go from less accurate to more accurate to more accurate to perfect. Don't expect to go from rough ground to within microns in one step. You gradually increase your accuracy. We are at 41, 6, and 5. Good, yeah, 34, 9, and 1/8. On this house, on this job, I started with this location as the critical hill to die on. That is the front corner of the garage that has to be no less than 20-foot setback from the front property line. The city has specified that. If I miss that, the whole thing's got to be torn out, or I have to get a very, very labor-intense special approval to violate the setback. So that was a first and critical point. That's why these batter boards right here were reviewed and used very carefully to home in and home in and home in to the location that I could reestablish using the swing ties that I've got located on that wall. Now the tools that you use on this include plumb bobs and levels and lasers and tape measures of all sorts and pencils, and all of these things are used in various ways to reestablish what the surveyor put in here 2 weeks ago. Triangulating is what is actually happening with these swing ties. When you have 3 of the dimensions of a triangle firmly established, you can always recreate a point. So when I bring the dimensions of 2 of the legs of this triangle on 2 different tape measures, carefully and tightly pulled to rest over the ground, with the other side of the triangle cast in concrete, I can have real confidence that this is exactly where it needs to be. Obviously, coming out of the ground is rough work, but the more attention to detail you place at this particular moment, the greater the likelihood of getting a really nice product once it has to be really nice. So I'm probably being a little excessive here. I'm shooting for within 1/4 of an inch in terms of distance. All those distances are on the plan. All of those distances are important. And so if I can get the locations, the horizontal distances, and particularly the squareness of the profile of this building within 1/4 of an inch, I mean, that's really close at this point. I think I'm closer than that. I could survive it if I was within 1/2 an inch. There are some times when a mistake is just too costly. And this would be a time where any kind of a big mistake at this juncture would never go away. So I'm just making double sure that there are no big mistakes, and I'm doing that by shooting for a tighter tolerance than maybe one would think you would have to shoot for. Essentially, what I'm doing here is transferring the perimeter of the building, as noted on the drawings, to the site. The plans show what the length of each wall is, and I set my string lines to match that exactly. I'm verifying that the corners are in the right locations using the swing ties, and then measuring from corner to corner to make sure the wall lengths are exactly right. Now, separate from making sure the lengths of the sides of the building are correct, I'm checking to make sure that the corners are also square. When I say square, I mean 90 degrees. I don't mean a little more, I don't mean a little less, I mean exactly 90 degrees. It's possible to have all the wall lengths correct and still have the building be out of square, and this will certainly cause serious issues down the road. You can check for square by measuring from corner to corner, or the diagonal on a square or a rectangle. You can go back and forth and check each diagonal and incrementally move one wall line or the other, keeping it parallel to its opposite wall until the diagonal measurements match exactly. That works. It's slow, but it works. If you utilize geometry and the Pythagorean theorem, you only need to check one diagonal one time. And I'll show this later on in a video that comes up later in our series to show how helpful this can be. It's probably easy to think when you see me sort of fussing over some of these distances that I'm overdoing it. And you might be right. You could be right, because the allowable tolerance at work at the level of footings could be pretty wide. But the possibility of a real problem is also great. It's real. I mean, if you miss this by a big distance, you're really hurt. So I am shooting for about 1/4 of an inch tolerance on distance, line as it's called, and on square. I think I've beat that. I think I'm closer than 1/4 at this point. By the time the concrete hits it, by the time we tie the rebar and put the templates on and stomp on these things and climb on them, they're going to be pushed out, maybe. But the overall profile of the building, I'm confident in saying, is within 1/4 of an inch of the right distance and within 1/4 of an inch of being square. And at that 20-foot setback is exactly right. I mean, within, I don't know, what kind of a measurement do you want me to make up? It's within 1/8 of an inch of being within 20 feet of the setback, and nobody is going to object to that. One mistake that people make when they're setting up batter boards is they're concentrating so much on getting the batter boards in place and the strings describing the outside of the footprint of the building that they forget that the strings should also describe some specific elevation of concrete so that all of the strings are in a plane that need to be in a plane. In this case, we are setting them at the elevation of the top of the footing. We're determining that with a laser. Now, a laser is a great thing. A water level will do it. An optical builder's level will do it. A transit will do it. I mean, there are, you can get fairly close with a line level, but a laser is, it's hard to beat. You've seen us with the excavation using a laser. We were measuring the distance of the dig when we were doing the excavation in tenths of a foot because we were using a linker rod, which is divided into engineering measurements in tenths of feet. But once the carpenter shows up, in this case me, everything is in feet and inches and fractions of an inch. So the laser tells me when the batter board is at the right height. My conclusion is that with the batter board at the right height and the string in the right place, this string is in line with the building at the top of the footing. So at this point, I'm going around the perimeter of the building, verifying that the batter boards are at the right elevation. Some of them were just a little bit high. I'm tapping them down to where the strings that I stretch around the perimeter of this project will be exactly at the elevation of the top of the footing. Now I have two different top of footing elevations. They're specified on the plan. We'll make sure they're right, and then we will be ready to move ahead. Anybody can do a job like this if you have enough time and are careful and methodical. You will also need a laser, a couple of tapes, and a helper. Now, obviously, perhaps, hiring a contractor for a job like this can take some of the pain out of it, but it can also be more than a little nerve-wracking because hiring a contractor can also add pain. However, if you can find the right contractor, it's the way to go if you want it done quickly and professionally. We've developed a video series with a lot of information about how to locate and work with a contractor. So for information on how to access that series of videos, please check the notes in the description. The next video in this series is about setting the forms that will hold the concrete for the footings. I hope you check it out. And as always, thanks for watching Essential Craftsman. And keep up the good work.